The morning sun rose over the colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. But nobody cared about the beautiful sunrise. In the main square, hundreds of human workers stood in silence, their faces showing fear and sadness. They had been ordered to watch what was about to happen. 17-year-old Jessica Morgan felt the rough hands of the Vren guards pushing her forward. Her wrists were tied behind her back so tight that her hands had gone numb. Her old work shirt was still dirty from yesterday's shift in the grain fields. 3 years. She had spent 3 years working under the hot sun, harvesting crops for the Vren Empire while barely getting enough food to survive. The wooden platform stood in the center of the square. Jessica had walked past it every day on her way to the fields. She had seen others stand there before. Some had survived their punishments. Others had not. Today it was her turn. The Vren magistrate stood waiting for her. He was tall, much taller than any human, with scales that looked like pale green metal in the sunlight. His yellow eyes showed no emotion as he watched her approach. In his clawed hand he held a data pad. When Jessica reached the platform, the guards forced her to climb the wooden steps. Each step felt heavy, like her legs were made of stone. She could hear people crying in the crowd. She recognized some of them. Mrs. Peterson, who had shared her bread with Jessica when she was sick. Old Mr. Walsh, who told stories about Earth to keep everyone's spirits up. And the children. The same children who had gotten her into this mess. The magistrate began reading from his data pad. His voice came out in clicks and hisses that hurt Jessica's ears. But the translator collar locked around her neck turned his words into English. The voice was cold and emotionless like a computer. The human female Jessica Morgan has been found guilty of 3 crimes. First, destruction of imperial property. Second, causing other human workers to stop working. Third, physical assault on a Vren supervisor. Jessica felt anger rise in her chest. Crimes? They called them crimes? Yesterday she had been working in the processing building when she heard crying. She had found Supervisor Kren standing over a group of young children. The oldest was maybe 11. The youngest was 7. They had been working for 14 hours straight and they could barely stand. When one little girl collapsed from exhaustion, Kren had started beating her with his shock stick. Jessica had run over and pushed herself between Kren and the children. She had yelled at him to stop. Kren had hit her across the face, splitting her lip. She could still taste blood in her mouth. When he raised his shock stick to hit the little girl again, Jessica had grabbed his arm and pushed him back hard. Kren had stumbled backward into one of the grain processing machines. The machine had sparked and stopped working. That was the sabotage they accused her of. The other workers who had gathered around were the incitement. And pushing a supervisor to save a child's life was assault. Now she was going to die for it. "Does the human have any final words?" the magistrate asked. His tone made it clear he did not care about her answer. Jessica's legs shook. She was scared. She did not want to die. She was only 17. She had so many things she still wanted to do. But even now, even standing here about to be executed, she was not sorry for what she had done. Those children were safe. That was what mattered. She looked out at the crowd. Not at the Vren officials sitting in their comfortable viewing stands above the square. Not at the magistrate or the executioner preparing the rope. She looked at her people. At the humans who had suffered alongside her. Her eyes found the children she had protected. They were crying, held back by adults who did not want them to see this but could not shield them from it. Jessica tried to smile at them to show them she was not afraid. She wanted them to remember her as brave. Then she spotted Michael Chin in the crowd. He was an older worker, maybe 40 years old. He had kind eyes and had always looked out for the younger humans. Jessica caught his gaze and spoke quietly but clearly. "Tell my dad that protocol nightmare is active." The magistrate did not understand what she had said. He did not care about human words or human meanings. To him, she was just another disobedient worker who needed to be removed. He made a gesture with his clawed hand. The executioner pulled the lever. Jessica felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. There was a moment of falling and then everything went dark. Her body hung limp in the morning breeze. The Vren magistrate addressed the crowd, telling them this was what happened to humans who broke the rules. Obey or face the same fate. The message was clear. The Vren guards started pushing people back to work. The show was over. Life would continue as it had before. One dead human girl meant nothing to the Empire. But they missed something important. In Jessica's pocket, hidden beneath the fabric of her work shirt, a small device no bigger than a coin began to glow. It pulsed with steady red light once every second. The light was so faint that nobody noticed it. But the signal it sent out was powerful. The signal shot up through the atmosphere, past the clouds, beyond the sky, and into the black emptiness of space. It traveled faster than light itself, reaching out into the dark. In high orbit around the planet, 12 massive ships floated in the silence of space. They had been there for years, hidden, waiting, their systems powered down to almost nothing. To any scanner they looked like dead hulks of metal, floating debris from some old war. But when that signal reached them, everything changed. Deep inside the first ship, computers that had been sleeping suddenly woke up. Lights flickered on in empty corridors. Command centers that had been dark for 15 years blazed with activity. Weapon systems that could crack planets began drawing power. One by one, all 12 ships came back to life. The Vren had just executed the wrong human. They had killed the daughter of the one man they should have feared most. And they had triggered a response that had been designed for exactly this moment. Protocol Nightmare was active. And the Vren Empire was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. 12 hours had passed since Jessica Morgan's body stopped swinging in the wind. High Commander Vrel sat in his command station high above the planet, surrounded by blinking screens and the quiet hum of computers. His scaled fingers moved across a data pad as he read through the daily reports. Everything looked good. Actually better than good. The human workers on the planet below were more obedient now. Production numbers had gone up. Nobody was talking back to supervisors. Nobody was causing trouble. The execution had worked perfectly, just as Vrel had planned. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied. Sometimes you had to make examples of troublemakers. It was unpleasant but necessary. The humans needed to understand their place in the Empire. They were workers, nothing more. This Jessica girl had forgotten that, and now the others would remember. Sir, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Vrel looked up. His communications officer stood at attention, but something about his posture seemed nervous. What is it? Vrel asked, annoyed at being disturbed. We're picking up a strange transmission from the planet's surface. It started exactly 12 hours ago, right at the moment of the execution. Vrel waved his hand dismissively. Humans are always sending out distress signals. They think their scattered colonies will somehow rescue them. It never works. Just block the signal. We tried to block it, sir. The officer's voice wavered slightly. But we can't. It's using some kind of quantum encryption that our systems can't break. We've never seen anything like it before. That got Vrel's attention. He sat up straighter. Quantum encryption? The humans don't have that technology. Our intelligence reports say their communication systems are primitive. Yes, sir. That's what the reports say. But this signal... The officer trailed off, looking at his screen with growing concern. Sir, there's something else. The signal is being answered. Answered? By whom? Before the officer could respond, every alarm in the command station started screaming at once. Red lights flashed throughout the bridge. Officers jumped up from their stations, shouting over each other. Contact. Multiple contacts. Where did they come from? Proximity alert. Proximity alert. Vrel rushed to the main display screen. His heart, which had been beating slowly and calmly moments ago, suddenly started pounding in his chest. On the screen, 12 enormous shapes had appeared at the edge of the star system. They had not been there a second ago. They had simply materialized out of nowhere, which meant they had come out of faster-than-light travel. All at the same time. In perfect formation. Get me a size reading on those ships, Vrel ordered, his voice harsh. The sensor officer's hands shook as he worked his controls. Sir, the computer is having trouble calculating. They're massive. Each one is reading as 3 times larger than our flagship. Maybe bigger. 3 times larger. Vrel felt ice in his veins. The Vren flagship was already the largest ship in their fleet. What kind of vessels were these? Identification. I want to know who they are right now. They're broadcasting transponder codes, sir. The communications officer's voice had gone very quiet. Human military codes. Old codes from before the war ended 20 years ago. The bridge went silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at the officer. That's impossible, Vrel said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Human military ships were destroyed in the war. They don't have a fleet anymore. Sir, I'm reading the ship classifications. The officer looked up, his yellow eyes wide with fear. They're Titan-class dreadnoughts. We have them listed in our database as extinct. Intelligence said they were all destroyed 2 decades ago. Titan-class dreadnoughts. Vrel knew that designation. Every military commander in the Vren Empire knew it. During the war, those ships had been nightmares. Weapons platforms that could level cities from orbit. Each one carried enough firepower to fight an entire fleet alone. But they were gone. The war had ended. The treaty had been signed. The humans had surrendered, scattered to small colonies, become workers and servants. That was the reality Vrel knew. Then why were 12 of those monsters sitting at the edge of his system? Suddenly, every screen in the command station flickered. The lights dimmed. And then a voice came through the speakers. A human voice, speaking perfect Vrenish with an accent that was cold and precise. "This is the UHSF Retribution, flagship of Battle Group Nightmare." The bridge was so quiet that Vrel could hear his own breathing. The voice continued, calm and measured, but carrying an undertone of barely controlled rage. "You have executed Jessica and Morgan, civilian colonist, age 17 years old, without trial and without evidence. You hanged a child for protecting other children. This was murder." Vrel opened his mouth to protest, but the voice cut him off. "You have 24 hours to surrender the following individuals to human custody. Magistrate Krell, who ordered the execution. Supervisor Then, who caused the incident. And High Commander Vrel, who approved the sentence." Vrel felt his blood turn to ice. They were asking for him. By name. "Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your orbital installations and the forced removal of all Vren personnel from this system. You have been weighed. You have been measured. And you have been found severely lacking. The clock starts now." The transmission ended. The screens returned to normal. But nobody on the bridge moved. Vrel stared at the display, watching the 12 massive ships holding position at the system's edge. His mind raced. This had to be a bluff. It had to be. They would not start a war over one dead human worker. Would they? "Who authorized this?" he whispered mostly to himself. "Who sends 12 dreadnoughts for a single colonist?" His intelligence officer, a female Vren named Senna, was typing frantically at her station. Suddenly she went very still. The color drained from her scales, turning them from green to pale gray. "Sir," she said quietly, "I found something in our databases. Jessica Morgan." Her full name was Jessica and Morgan. But she had another name before she came to the colony. "What are you talking about?" Vrel demanded. "Her father, sir. Her father is listed as Admiral Robert Morgan, former Director of Human Naval Intelligence. He disappeared 15 years ago after his wife was killed in a Vren raid. Intelligence assumed he was dead." The name hit Vrel like a physical blow. Robert Morgan. Every Vren commander knew that name. During the war, Morgan had been responsible for strategies that had cost the Vren dozens of ships and thousands of lives. He was brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely devoted to protecting human lives. "What's Protocol Nightmare?" Vrel asked, remembering the last words the dead girl had said. Senna's hands shook as she pulled up the information. "It's a human military doctrine, sir. A contingency plan. If any immediate family member of high command staff is executed without proper legal process, it triggers an automatic military response. The response is designed to be overwhelming and impossible to ignore." "How overwhelming?" Senna looked up at him, genuine fear in her eyes. "Sir, the doctrine specifically states that the response must be severe enough that no one would ever dare test it. It's meant to be the ultimate deterrent." Vrel looked back at the screen, at the 12 ships that represented more firepower than his entire orbital defense fleet. They had hanged a teenager to teach the humans a lesson about obedience. Instead, they had just woken up humanity's most dangerous admiral and given him every reason to show no mercy. The clock was ticking. Within 18 hours, the Vren Empire had assembled its response fleet. 300 warships appeared in the system, arriving from bases across the sector. It was the largest military force the Vren had gathered in over 10 years. Every available ship had been called in. Cruisers, destroyers, battleships, and support vessels filled the space around the colony world like a metal cloud. High Commander Vrel stood on his command bridge, watching the massive fleet take up defensive positions. He felt some of his confidence returning. 300 ships against 12. The numbers were overwhelmingly in his favor. Perhaps the humans had been bluffing after all. His tactical officer stood nearby, studying the display screens. "Surely 12 ships cannot defeat this fleet," the officer said. But Vrel noticed that his voice did not sound as certain as his words suggested. There was doubt there, hidden beneath false confidence. The human deadline was approaching. 24 hours. Vrel had refused to surrender himself or the others. He was a high commander of the Vren Empire. He did not bow to threats, especially not from defeated humans. The very idea was insulting. The clock counted down. 23 hours. 23 hours and 30 minutes. 23 hours and 50 minutes. Then 24 hours exactly. The communication channel opened again. This time the voice was different. It was still human, still speaking Vrenish, but it carried a weight that made everyone on the bridge go silent. This was not the calm, measured voice from before. This was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. "This is Admiral Robert Morgan of the UHSF Retribution. You have refused to surrender those responsible for my daughter's murder. Very well. So be it." Vrel activated his own communication system, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Murder? That is an emotional exaggeration, Admiral. It was a lawful execution under Vren colonial law. Your daughter broke our rules and she was 17 years old." The Admiral's voice exploded through the speakers like thunder. The sheer rage in those words made several Vren officers flinch. "She protected children from being beaten. Children. And you hanged her in a public square like she was nothing. You did not give her a trial. You did not present evidence. You did not allow her to defend herself. You murdered a child because she showed more courage than any of you." Vrel tried to respond, but the Admiral kept talking. "You want to discuss law? Fine. Let me show you human law. Let me show you what happens when you execute our children without mercy. Let me teach you a lesson that your empire will remember for 1,000 years." On the tactical display, the 12 human dreadnoughts began moving. They accelerated toward the Vren fleet with impossible speed for ships so large. Vrel had expected them to be slow, heavy vessels that relied on armor. He was wrong. "All ships open fire," Vrel commanded. The Vren fleet unleashed everything they had. Hundreds of energy weapons fired simultaneously, filling space with deadly light. Missiles streaked toward the approaching human ships, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. But nothing hit. The human ships moved like dancers, sliding through space with precision that should have been impossible. They dodged, weaved, and spun, avoiding the incoming fire with movements too perfect to be manual piloting. Their computers must have been predicting every shot before it was fired. And then the humans fired back. The weapons made no sound in the vacuum of space, but their effects were devastating. Vrel watched as one of his destroyers simply disappeared. Not exploded. Not broken apart. Just gone, converted into vapor in an instant. "What was that?" Vrel shouted. "Gravitational weapons, sir," his science officer screamed. "They are using gravitational lances. They are crushing our ships from the inside out." Another Vren cruiser died, its hull collapsing in on itself as if grabbed by an invisible hand. Then another. And another. The human ships did not fire wildly. Each shot was calculated, precise, surgical. They were not trying to cause chaos. They were methodically dismantling the Vren fleet piece by piece, and they made it look easy. "Return fire. All weapons." Vrel ordered desperately. The Vren ships tried. They fired everything they had at the approaching human vessels. Energy beams struck the human armor and simply bounced off, absorbed by shields that seemed impossible. Missiles exploded against the hull and did nothing. Nothing was working. "Sir, our weapons are not penetrating their armor. Their defensive systems are too advanced." Vrel watched in growing horror as his fleet, the pride of the Vren Empire, was destroyed in front of him. The humans were not even using their full power. They fired once, killed a ship, then moved to the next target. Calm. Controlled. Efficient. 30 minutes passed. In that short time, over 100 Vren ships were gone. Destroyed or disabled. The survivors began breaking formation, their captains panicking, fleeing in whatever direction seemed safest. "Cease fire." The Admiral's voice rang out again, and instantly, all 12 human ships stopped shooting. They held position, their weapons still charged, still ready but silent. "I will give you one more chance, Commander Vrel." The Admiral's voice was quieter now, but somehow more frightening. "Not because you deserve mercy. Not because you have earned it. But because my daughter believed in giving people second chances, even when they did not deserve them. She was better than me. She was better than you. And I will honor her memory by showing you the mercy you refused to show her." The main view screen changed. Instead of tactical displays, it now showed a human face. Admiral Robert Morgan looked like a man who had lived through hell. He appeared to be in his 50s, with short brown hair streaked with gray. His face was lined with exhaustion and grief. His eyes were red from crying, but his expression was carved from stone. He wore a black military uniform that looked old, like it had been stored away for years. Behind him, Vrel could see the bridge of the human flagship. It was enormous, stretching back into shadows. Every station was occupied by humans with grim, determined faces. Every screen showed targeting information for the remaining Vren ships. This was not just a warship. This was a weapon designed for one purpose: overwhelming force. "I am going to land on that planet," the Admiral said quietly. "I am going to see my daughter's body one last time. And then you will make a choice, Commander Vrel. You can surrender yourself and the others responsible, or I will eliminate every Vren presence in this system. Your soldiers, your stations, your ships, everything." He leaned forward and his eyes burned with controlled fury. "Choose wisely. You will not get a third chance." Admiral James Taylor stood alone in the colonial square, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. Above him, his daughter's body swayed gently in the morning breeze. The rope creaked against the metal post. Around him, a tight circle of human Marines in black combat armor held their positions, keeping back the growing crowd of both human colonists and terrified Vren civilians who hadn't managed to escape yet. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. In 30 years of military service, through 3 wars and countless battles, he'd never felt anything like this. The weight in his chest threatened to crush him. He reached up himself to cut her down. Nobody else would touch her. Nobody else had the right. She was so small in his arms. So impossibly light. Just 17 years old. She had her mother's green eyes, the same eyes that used to light up when she talked about becoming a doctor. She had his stubborn chin, the one that got her into arguments with her teachers back on Earth. Now those eyes would never open again. That chin would never lift in defiance again. "Sir." Captain Rodriguez approached slowly, like he was walking toward a wounded animal. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The Vren have surrendered the magistrate and the supervisor responsible for this. Commander Vrel has requested to speak with you personally." Taylor didn't look up from his daughter's face. He brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, the same way he used to when she was little and fell asleep reading. "Bring them all to me," he said. His voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from someone else. "And Rodriguez?" "Yes, sir." "Send the signal." Rodriguez hesitated. In all their years serving together, through every difficult decision, he'd never questioned an order. But now his face went pale. "Sir? Which signal exactly?" Taylor's eyes finally lifted to meet his captain's gaze. They were cold now, distant, like looking into deep space. "All of them. Every single protocol. Every contingency plan we've kept locked away. It's time they knew the truth about us." The message went out on encrypted channels that had remained silent for 3 decades. Across the galaxy, on 47 different worlds where humans lived under alien rule or in colonies that seemed vulnerable and weak, the same thing started happening at exactly the same moment. Civilian transport ships that had been hauling cargo for years suddenly dropped their outer hulls. Beneath the peaceful exteriors were weapons arrays powerful enough to crack planets. Weapon systems that had been installed piece by piece, component by component, over decades of careful planning. Human colonists who'd appeared meek and broken, who'd bowed their heads and followed alien rules without complaint, opened sealed bunkers hidden beneath their settlements. Inside were enough military weapons and equipment to outfit entire armies. Combat armor, plasma rifles, artillery systems, all perfectly maintained and ready for immediate deployment. Peaceful research stations studying alien plants or mapping star systems activated defense grids that had been disguised as sensor arrays. Power cores that supposedly ran scientific equipment suddenly powered up weapons that could level entire invasion forces. On the Vren homeworld, inside their towering imperial palace, their high council watched their tactical displays with growing horror. Intelligence reports were updating in real time, flooding their systems with new data. Every human population center they'd carefully cataloged as weak and defenseless was now broadcasting military-grade signals. Every scattered human settlement they dismissed as the sad remnants of a defeated species was revealing itself as part of a vast, coordinated military network. "How long?" the Vren Empress demanded, her voice shaking with rage and fear. She turned on her intelligence chief, her crystalline features darkening. "How long have they been hiding this from us?" The intelligence chief looked like he might collapse. His hands trembled as he pulled up the data files. 30 years, Your Majesty," he said, his voice barely working. "Since the peace treaty was signed. Since we thought we'd beaten them. They've been building this whole time. Hiding it. Waiting." The Empress stared at the galactic map showing human positions lighting up like stars being born. Waiting for what? What were they waiting for? Back on the colony world, Admiral Taylor stood up slowly, still holding his daughter's body. He looked at the captured Vren officials, at the magistrate who'd ordered the execution, at the supervisor who'd carried it out. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried across the silent square. "You wanted to know what happens when you push humanity too far," he said. "You're about to find out. We've been patient. We've been peaceful. We followed your rules and lived under your laws. But you took our children. You hurt the one thing we would burn galaxies to protect." He looked up at the sky, where human warships were already dropping out of faster-than-light travel. "Now you learn what humans really are." 6 months had passed since that terrible morning in the Colonial Square. 6 months since Admiral James Taylor had held his daughter's lifeless body in his arms. In that half-year, the entire galaxy had been turned upside down and rebuilt from the ground up. The mighty Vren Empire, which had ruled over dozens of worlds for centuries, had collapsed from within like a rotten tree. Their government had surrendered completely after 3 more colony worlds were forcibly evacuated by human fleets. The evacuations had been swift and overwhelming. Human warships had appeared in orbit, given the Vren authorities exactly 1 hour to leave, and then removed every single alien administrator by force when they refused. Other alien species, watching the Vren fall so quickly, had rushed to renegotiate their treaties with human colonies. Suddenly, agreements that had seemed permanent and unchangeable were being rewritten overnight. Slavery was abolished on 14 different worlds. Protection fees, that humans had been forced to pay for decades, were not only stopped but refunded with interest. Colonial borders were redrawn. Laws were changed. The entire power structure of several sectors had shifted. Admiral Taylor stood once more in the same colonial square where he'd lost his daughter, but the place looked completely different now. The gallows where she died were gone, torn down piece by Vren prisoners of war who were now rebuilding the colony under human supervision. They worked in silence, heads down, no longer the arrogant overlords they'd once been. In place of that horrible instrument of death stood something beautiful. A monument of pure white marble rose 20 feet into the air, catching the sunlight and making it glow. At its center was a holographic display that showed his daughter at 16 years old, before all this happened. She was laughing in the image, her head thrown back, her green eyes bright and full of life and hope. The kind of hope that comes easy when you're young and think the universe is basically good. Around the base of the monument, carved into the marble and filled with gold lettering, were names. Thousands of them. The names of 4,127 humans who had died under Vren occupation over the past 30 years. Men and women and children who'd been worked to death, executed for small infractions, or simply disappeared and never seen again. Every single name was there now, preserved forever, impossible to forget or erase. "The dedication ceremony is ready, sir," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, standing at his elbow. He'd been there through everything from that first terrible moment to now. Taylor nodded slowly and stepped up to the podium that had been set up facing the monument. Before him stretched an ocean of faces. Thousands of people had gathered. Human colonists who'd been freed from oppression stood next to their children. Kids who his daughter had protected with her own body were there with their families. Representatives from 40 different alien species who'd requested permission to attend stood in designated areas. Even some Vren were present, standing at the very back with their heads bowed low in shame. 6 months ago, Taylor began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent square, "My daughter was executed on this exact spot for the crime of protecting children from being beaten. She was only 17 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She wanted to be a doctor. She believed deeply in mercy, in giving people second chances, in treating even her enemies with dignity and respect." He paused, his throat tight, looking out at all those faces watching him. "My daughter would have been absolutely horrified by the war that followed her death. If she could have seen it coming, she would have begged me to show restraint, to find a peaceful solution, to not let her death be the spark that burned down empires. And that's exactly what makes her death so devastating and tragic, because the galaxy desperately needed more people like her, not fewer. We needed her kindness. We needed her compassion. We needed her belief that people could change and grow and become better." Behind him, the hologram shifted and changed, showing different images from his daughter's too short life. There she was working in the agricultural fields, her hands dirty but smiling. There she was teaching young children how to read, patient and encouraging. There she was sharing her own food rations with families who had even less than she did, going hungry herself so others could eat. "But my daughter's death taught the galaxy something critically important," Taylor continued, his voice growing stronger. "It taught every species out there that humanity will not accept the casual murder of our children. That we will not bow down and submit to species who see us as inferior or disposable. That our patience, while vast, has definite limits. And when those limits are finally crossed, when you push us past that line, the response will be absolute and overwhelming. He looked directly at the Vren representatives standing at the back. We gave you 30 years of peace. 30 years of cooperation and restraint. And you answered that with a rope around a child's neck. The square remained absolutely silent. Remember her name, Taylor said softly. Remember what happened when you forgot that humans love their children more than they fear your empires. Remember and never forget.